Hello, good morning. It's Tuesday, and we're excited to kick off our day here with the opportunity to share our brand new live show effort that is being hosted by the ESUCC and specifically the Blended Learning Workgroup as a part of our Teaching and Learning with Technology affiliate across our ESU network. And this is a new effort on our part that really is something that kind of bubbled up from conversations within that TLT and Blended Learning specifically work group as that group tried to re-envision where they wanted to go next, hence the title, and evolve over time. And so I'm really grateful to Jody Bauer of ESU 11, to Craig Hicks of ESU 13, and to Peg Coover of ESU 10 for joining us as Blended Learning Workgroup members and our guest presenters for today as we share with everyone kind of the vision for this new effort. And so welcome. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, and to give a little bit of framework for folks, here's the aim. All right, the Blended Learning Work Group identified some new purpose statements. There's 4 of them, and 2 of them really are being addressed with this effort where we're trying to support educators and best practices of lesson design with a focus on content pedagogy and technology, along with extending the professional learning and network reach of our group members. And so for us to be able to talk about where we're going with this initiative in future episodes, so we'll just say that maybe from the start, we're going to focus on a different piece of what we feel like is next with blended learning or something that's at the forefront of our current efforts. And so these topics might include things like UDL, distance learning, remote teaching and learning, right, in those kind of spaces. And before we get to where we're headed to next, let's start with this very first episode about saying where we've been, because this work has been in our state since 2013. And so I'm grateful to these individuals because they are very steeped in that history and really kickstarted this for us. And so I'm not sure who wants to start off by giving us that context, but would love to learn a little bit more about that.
I can jump in. Actually, this came about, was a vision of Dr. Bloomstead, who's now our current commissioner of education in Nebraska. And because of a number of different things, he identified 3 people across the state. I was one of them. Linda Dickinson, who was with Lincoln Public Schools at that time, has since retired, and Beth Cubish, who was at ESU 7, were identified as 3 co-chairs that would lead a blended learning initiative at a statewide scale. It wasn't, there were limited funds that were available. Basically, our work at that point was gathering information, sharing within SDA, TLT, PDO in general. So sharing that message throughout the different affiliates within our ESU organizations, and presenting across the state at various conferences. So it was really us gathering information and sharing that information with a variety of audiences to get them kind of up to speed and start to see what blended learning could do in the classroom.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, Craig. And I think it also had to do with, based on your research, I know there were pockets of teachers doing a lot with blended learning, and we saw the great work that was going into that. And I think too, there was just, wanting to put opportunities out there to put it at a district level in order for, whole schools and whole districts to start implementing blended learning based on those pockets of teachers and what we were seeing with them.
And I remember some of the training that we had as part of our ESU groups. Marcia Kish came, and then we started seeing other people at different conferences that we were seeing over and over again. And that professional learning really helped us kind of move towards that next level of our support of the blended learning pilot.
Yeah, and so I'm glad that you bring that up, Peg, and I actually will share the graphic here and that we can reference ongoing. But if you look near the bottom around 2016, which is represented there on the right, it does start to talk about that cohort 1. And so we'll pivot and ask at this time, to start to give us some of the, how did this go from a conversation to a pilot?
Craig, that might go to you.
Okay. So again, it kind of goes back to what Jody was talking about. We had pockets of individual teachers, but not really a focus within either a building or a district. So when we started looking at this blended pilot, our goal was to have 5 team members from a district. So there was building leadership, there were classroom teachers, And that first time around, we had their technology, either integration specialist or network person, to be part of that. So they had a team of people. We did some work with Highlander Institute. I know we'll talk about the rubric here in a bit. But they came in and did work with ESU folks and began that process of us kind of trying to identify how we wanted to take this project forward and work with those individual districts and schools.
Yeah, and I think if I think back, didn't we do like a readiness rubric? We had to have schools kind of fill out a rubric based on whether they were ready or not for this pilot. I think it had to do with, their technology and what they had for that. And then if they were able to put together a team of teachers and to be able to support the pilot within the district itself. Mm-hmm.
And I would add too that the Highlander Institute really was a good partner for our ESUs in our project. And, they're just always willing to answer questions, jump on a Zoom call, and then gave us lots of resources from which we drew what we wanted to look for in our observation protocol, or the rubric as it's known to.
Well, then I guess we should just go right ahead and pivot to that rubric, since we're getting a chance to bring that up. And so here's what that looks like. And actually, I'm going to switch to this look so that we still have a chance to kind of see that and listen and learn from all of you as well. And so, let's maybe talk to some of these specific points that went into this. Again, as Craig mentioned, supported by the Highlander Institute. But some of the talking points in there might include.
Well, just identifying the elements. The document that Highlander had put together had, 30 plus elements that they looked at. And we decided to break this down into a little bit more manageable. So we would take this and actually do observations in classrooms. And it was a bit of a challenge because teachers, when somebody comes into their classroom, they're thinking evaluation. And so it took an effort on our part to let them know that this is not an evaluation. We're coming in, and you can even identify the different elements of this rubric that you'd like us to focus on and have conversations with them as they did their implementation.
Yeah, and looking across this and that's everything from the teacher and student interaction to student screen interactions, student to student interaction, and then also the instruction ranging across the benchmarks with those from not yet to fully integrated. So, we're go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say, and I think too, back to Craig's comment, the Highlanders document had so much and so many indicators. And we felt it would be so overwhelming for teachers. So as we broke this down too, we gave our teachers and our groups of school districts that came together an opportunity to look at this as well. So they were able to kind of look at, where am I going to improve, or what do I need to do to in order to apply these best practices in order to make blended learning successful in the classroom. So just breaking it down, I think also helped the teachers so well, and helped us, going into classrooms and being able to do those observations. It was hard, just focusing on individual best practices and figuring out where they're putting them into place, and then having those conversations after we meet.
Yeah, and I do want to go over here briefly to one of the nice things about being able to share in this format is that we can be collaborative. And so a couple comments that have come in online. Jason Everett is going back through and having some nostalgia, maybe, recalling some of the efforts that were made all the way back even in 2010 and 11, and went on to say it's just cool to see how it has evolved. And so I think that's why, again, we want to continue to stay current, which is why the title of this is What's Next, right? That Nebraska education and technology, the intersection between those two is where our branding comes from. And there's a question actually from Eileen in the comments where she was interested in how Highlander, if they did, help with determining the domain. So if we could speak to that. We also, Jason said, yeah, there it is. So, but if we want to speak to that more broadly.
I would say that definitely Highlander. And in their initial document that we kind of built this rubric from, it was more like these domains that you see listed here, things to look for, I guess, the look fors. But then they also evolved kind of how they formulated their content that they provided with the districts that they worked with. And they actually kind of had narrowed it down to 4 like bigger domains and then indicators within those. So I think initially some of those domains that you see in the observation protocol became more of indicators in the actual domains. And I'm just going to read them real quick without, I know you don't have that document, but classroom culture. And so you can see some of those things that would fit into classroom culture. Student identity, interest, and agency was another domain, differentiation, and then rigor and mastery. And so we started using those domains in our own ESU work too.
Yeah, and just even as you say those, out loud here for our conversation, those are still practices that we're working to integrate today. It looks a little different, maybe with the software that's in support or familiarity that some teachers might have with some of those practices, but they all continue to evolve. I do want Eileen says thanks to everyone for some insight on that. And so how, I guess to get back to, I'm going to go back to this graphic that we had earlier, because this evolves over time. And as it grew from kind of pilot 1 and a cohort, and obviously putting together the rubric that we just all had the opportunity to view, what did it look like as we kind of got to a point where it's cohort number 2 and really an effort that, and here's a representation of across Nebraska, right, where we had involvement from different districts. Maybe talk to the scaling up of that.
Well, and as part of the project, and we kind of referenced it earlier, but there was an application process, and each ESU would share that information out with their member districts and get people to, again, fill out that questionnaire if they were ready. And if they were ready, then they completed that application process, and we did the selection. In cohort 1, we had, I think, 27 districts that participated, or schools, and then had success with that and had funds to be able to do a second cohort and had 21 more participate the next time. And we'd have a kickoff in the spring, and then a little bit of summer training, but we had ongoing participation and collaboration with those schools. We'd go out and do the observations, but we'd also do some things which was difficult, but training opportunities for them during the school year where they could jump into a Zoom session and we'd have conversations. But ongoing support for those teachers, especially to be able to come together and have conversations and share what's being successful and where they saw challenges.
And I would just say too, part of the, when they applied and became part of the pilot, then we as ESU people were able to not only provide some training and some feedback throughout the school year or just, I guess, professional learning, but going out into classrooms and using that observation protocol and visiting the classrooms and gathering evidence of those best practices and being put into place. And so we had some picture evidence and some video evidence that we were able to compile and share and use for our own growth as well as ESU coaches.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up, because I do know that there was an effort made in 2020 to add to bring this kind of impact study together, and I'm hopeful people can see some of the details that are there. But talking about things like the percent of time that practices were implemented, so some data from teachers that took part in the cohort work for empowering learners and differentiating instruction and learner choice and voice, and along with the feedback from students. And so high numbers on both sides there. Looking at some of the Hattie principles from those best practices, and really some pretty nice numbers as far as things like self-efficacy, accountability, achievement, and enjoyment of their learning, and then frequency, and some quotes too. And so this particular document is helpful for giving us maybe some visuals to some of the things that Peg was referencing there. And additionally, we also put in the chat or in the comments, I should say, the link to that rubric if anyone is interested in accessing that. Yeah, so sorry to kind of take us in that a little bit different direction there, Peg, but
No, that's okay.
I would like underscore some of what data was received from as a follow-up to those experiences.
Well, and if you go back to that other graphic, the one with the mountain.
Sure.
When we were talking earlier, before we got on live here, I love this graphic because it kind of shows where we went, like where the pilot kind of began, but then kind of at the end, that remote learning planning, that in 2020, when that happened and all of our schools were remote for the last couple months of that school year, we were ready. And like teachers that were doing the blended learning at that time, who were, even if they weren't part of the pilot, but they were using those practices, they were more ready for that too. And so it just kind of evolved into creating those support resources for teachers in more of a digital, virtual environment.
Yeah, I actually had schools during, the pandemic year where they were home and trying to teach their students. The ones that actually felt more comfortable using the technology were the blended learning teachers, so I think we built that foundation and got them a little more prepared, and they were a little more comfortable with utilizing the technology in those different ways and in that capacity.
Yeah, it was a huge jump when we hit that March of 2020. The skills that those teachers had built really took them a long way.
And it was helpful on our end too to be able to build out, as we did at that time, an entire website with remote teaching and learning supports. And so that was something that I know we had a big effort from everyone across the state. When I say everyone, there were 65, I think, different videos that were modeling best practices and trying to add some of this digital age pedagogy framework so that teachers could start to think through their lesson design and the planning of getting ready to facilitate in those spaces. And it's kind of like my boss, Craig Lofquist, says sometimes. It was this it was a place where preparedness met opportunity. And so we're able to step into that. But it's important to also bring up too that things have evolved so much even since that time because of that shift. And so what we I feel like a blended learning work group have done, because now that was about whenever I started, to be quite honest. I've felt that momentum that was there before start to sort itself out as education and the integration of digital tools has evolved to a place where, we're having these conversations about what's next and what's going on at this time and what's the latest. And there's a real need for that. And so it's great to spend some time here getting grounded in our history before we start to, in upcoming episodes, focus in on, again, something specific like UDL, for example, and do a deep dive on that for 20 minutes ahead of having kind of some open time to chat. So in referencing that, in about a minute, we're going to move to a space where we can be really collaborative and invite everyone online to be a part of our dialogue. But before we get to that point, Craig, Jody, Peg, is there anything that we'd like to kind of say to put a bow on this portion of our history and conversation?
Well, Andrew, I think what you said in that, pedagogy is key. And we're having conversations across affiliate groups now, getting our staff developers involved in the conversation, doing some, that's at a different level than we've had in the past. And being able to really look at how does this change teaching and learning is a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's honestly of the other, because we said there's 4 purpose statements. The other 2 that are not necessarily addressed in this format, but kind of are still in just the access to the conversations that we're having, are to work on enhancing those cross-affiliate collaborations in a way that makes that integration of technology seamless with the best practices of any number of models or initiatives. Jody, Peg, anything to add before we pivot to our next segment?
I'm ready to continue to move forward with blended learning. I think it's something that's continuously evolving, and having a group to work with to be able to get it to another level, I think is going to be exciting.
Yep, excited definitely to keep moving it forward. And seeing where we go next.
Yeah, we'll have to see what's next. And actually, what's next in our What's Next segment, or I should say show, our next segment is to invite everyone to share out the latest tech tip, tool, resource, best practice that you've experienced. And so we'll make time each and every month as we have this meeting, like in the last Tuesday at 9:30 a.m., to learn from you. And so we're going to pivot to that now. And ask all of you to share in the comments something that you've learned recently that we would be able to bring up and learn together in this last 10 minutes of these segments. And so excited for this portion of our time also. So if you're on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, feel free to add comments that we can, as you've seen throughout the show today, bring in. And while we wait maybe for our first one, Jody, Peg, Craig, is there anything that you've seen recently that you found kind of interesting or could see its applicability to the blended learning conversation?
Well, this isn't new, but I mean, just using some kind of a screencasting tool. I use Screencastify, but there's others out there. As a teacher too, you know, if those things there's parts of your lesson you're going to have to repeat over and over again, record it and have it available. If it's instructions for something, or if it's like a quick mini lesson, like just get it recorded, and then you have it if students are absent. Get comfortable with that kind of a tool.
Absolutely. I love that suggestion. Particularly, and I love what you said for even just instructions. I think sometimes we think it has to be instruction when it could also just be that you're facilitating the directions to an assignment in a way that's maybe accessible to more learners because they can hear it or see the visuals with it instead of just reading 3 sentences off the top of a page. Any others? I've got one if not, but
I'll speak to an LMS. And again, it doesn't really matter where you're at, Schoology, Canvas, Google Classroom. And again, I think it's that idea of student agency, of being able to take some ownership of the learning process when you put it in that digital environment and make things available in that space, takes students to a different level.
Of that. And I know we have our statewide Canvas initiative. And so there's certainly a lot of schools that have been starting to use an LMS more and maybe even less as a place to house documents, almost like a digital pinup board is maybe historically what those were looking like. And as Craig's alluding to now, it's a place to facilitate learning experiences and integrate things like that video instruction. So love that. I'll share one in the chat and kind of collectively here then. So there you go. If you access the Good Life EDU podcast, it's there. The episode that we did about a month and a half ago with Eric Kurtz featured a conversation about a particular Google add-on or program, Google Video piece that it functions similar to something like an Ed Puzzle where you get to watch and you can build in questions. But what I love is that it does, it creates a transcript, and then that transcript can be translated with a simple drop down. And so if students find that they, you know, if English is not their first language, they would have access to that type of translation from a teacher-created instructional video piece. And that's for now, Chromebook only, but it's a tool that I think has a way to really transform learning for students in those spaces that really need that kind of support. So you can check out the podcast to learn more details on that. Any others in our What's New to You? And would certainly invite folks from our online community here that are joining us to, I'll throw this up here, anyone can share ideas in the comments. Or we can put Jody on the spot too and say,
well, I can just go back to Peg's comment, you know, about doing videos and stuff. In fact, you know, we've been meeting with our elementary teachers and doing math with them. And one of the conversations came up with, you know, how do we get parents to understand this new math shift and how to teach math? And a conversation came up. A teacher had mentioned that she records video instructions, and those video instructions go home if parents need to know how to help their child at home. And so I think not only, being beneficial for students and for those teachers, but we need to make sure we involve our parents in so much of this, because so many things are shifting and changing, and the way teachers are having to, change their instruction strategies and things too. But it just reminded me of that when you mentioned that, Peg. That was a good conversation to have, because I think just knowing that if that's an option for teachers to be able to do some recording of their instruction, even if it's just a mini short instructional, video, it doesn't have to be fairly long, just to give those parents an idea of how their students are learning, and to be able to support them at home.
Yeah, I like that. And back to Craig's too about an LMS, learning management system.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of found that out when our schools were in remote learning, that it was the schools that didn't have that one place, that, the one place. Otherwise, parents were going to 3 or 4 different places to find what the teachers were asking their students to do. And I love that Jason, I don't think he's on here anymore, but Jason Ever always says, like you go into a school and you have the doorway to your classroom, and you have the doorway to the library, and you know where to go in the school building. So how do you navigate your digital classroom?
Mm-hmm.
So that LMS is that digital doorway to your classroom, and teaching your students where to find things in that LMS is critical to kind of getting off on the right foot with blended learning, or just if you're utilizing any kind of digital resources.
Well, and that parent communication, there are tools in those learning management systems to be able to communicate information out to parents, and that connection is key.
Yeah, and as we kind of get things, bringing them to a little bit to a closer, we have a couple more responses here online. And so Dawn has asked real-time collaborating on a whiteboard program like Mural, Canva, or Zoom on Annotate. I like that as a suggestion and something we could consider doing. And I know collaborative notes have been something that I've seen more and more classroom teachers making space for their students to be able to create, where there might even be something like a shared Google Doc, for example, where students can then comment and build out as a note-taking strategy, doing those things together. Jamboard would be another place where you could do things like that, or even on Google Sites if you need a little bit more of a creative spot that's familiar. And Eileen has asked, what should a teacher do if their district doesn't purchase an LMS? Suggestions for that?
There are many free options. I mean, you can do Canvas for free. You can do Schoology for free. There are benefits to doing it as a school or a district, because you can do some integrations that aren't available in those free options. But there are free options available if you choose to do that. If you are a Google for Education or Google Workspace district, Google Classroom is an option. There are some limitations to Google Classroom in comparison to a Schoology or Canvas, but it can still function quite well.
Mm-hmm.
Love those as suggestions. Schoology was one of the first ones that I got to access myself. So I totally understand the need for that. And great question from Eileen. This brings us to about the end of our show for today. And so what I do want to say before we conclude is that you can join us next time, which will be on October 25th at 9:30 a.m. Central. And we'll be meeting at that point to talk a little bit about distance education, distance learning, and some blended practices in that space. And if you ever miss an episode, you can catch us on our socials along with, but I would probably suggest you go to the YouTube page that we have for our ESUCC, as all the past episodes will be focused and available there through a playlist. So, but before we conclude, I do want to say thank you to Jody, to Peg, and to Craig, not only for your investment in this work since 2013, but all the way to now, and grounding us in the story of blended learning and best practices in that space in our state. Up to this point now, we're ready for whatever's next and ongoing with this opportunity to share out each and every month. So thank you all, and we will see everybody next time.